I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto.
And I'm Matt Bernico. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois.
This week on the podcast, we are going to keep it a little bit lighter. Last week we talked about how, the whole planet is slowly getting burned out by capitalism, and that's a huge bummer. Some people even messaged me and said it was a huge bummer, and I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. So this week...
They're not wrong.
They're not wrong. It's a huge bummer. I don't know. This week, though, we're going to try to lighten the mood a little bit and kind of take it easy by reflecting on what some people have called America's artist, the whole country's very own artist, the adopted aesthetic of all of America. And that is a fella named Jon Mcnaughton. Jon Mcnaughton, I guess, if you pronounce it like laughter.
No, I don't. I think it's McNaughton.
No, I think it's McNaughton too. So Jon Mcnaughton, for those of you that don't know, he's a painter. He rose to prominence during the primaries, and he is just a wild dude with a lot of very how should I put this, creative interpretations of events past and present. Painting's just riddled with symbolism. I mean, there's a Dan Brown novel in here for sure. Just uncovering the layers and layers of meaning that he puts on the canvas. And we're going to try to take a few of those apart. But don't worry, we are going to talk about communism as we go, and talk a little bit about some things like socialist realism and kitsch and what Christian kitsch might be like. But just to kind of set the stage, Matt, do you want to give us like a roadmap here of some of the Naughton paintings we're going to examine?
Yeah, so we've selected sort of a smattering of paintings that we can kind of unpack throughout the show. We're going to start with one called Via Dolorosa, which is, as Dean told me just before this, which means the way of the cross. I guess a Catholic thing. Protestants don't know about it. We don't know any words that are in different languages, just English. So we're going to take a look at that painting here, and then we'll kind of move our way through some of Mcnaughton's more famous pieces. We've done this on a previous episode, but this time we're getting really into it. So not just jokes, but analysis. That deep, good, scientific, socialist analysis that you weren't here for. You're here because it's a Christian podcast, but also you get the scientific socialism.
That's right. Science degrees.
Science degrees. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So... We're going to start off taking a look at Via Dolorosa, Jon Mcnaughton's painting that is just a masterpiece. Dean, how would you describe this to somebody who is, say, listening to a podcast and wondering what we're talking about?
Yeah, okay. So let me suggest a task for those playing the Magnificast home game. Say you're listening to this in your car, or you're not able to get on the internet right now. As we go through these paintings, we're just going to create a word picture, and you can create a brain picture, a thought picture, out of that word picture, and then later on you can compare it to the real thing. I mean, of course, you're never going to approximate the artistic genius that is Jon Mcnaughton, but you can do your best imaginatively and just kind of see where it goes. So I'll give you just a brief scope of what we're looking at here. The first painting in our curation, our special curation in the Magnificast Museum. So Via Dolorosa, in the center of the frame is an image of Christ being burdened by the cross, like you might see in a Stations of the Cross series in a church. And coming to his aid is a young gentleman, probably in his mid-20s. He looks like he just rolled right in off of Wall Street. And he's got one arm on Jesus' shoulder, comforting our Lord and Savior, and another arm outstretched a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then surrounding these two figures, these two holy men, are just a smattering of all kinds of people. And when I say all kinds of people, I don't just mean all kinds of random people. I mean people like, here's just a couple. You've got Mother Teresa. Really familiar face. You definitely are going to recognize her. If you look a little closer, you might see someone like John Calvin, a few prominent theologians. John Paul II's in here. And if you keep on looking, you'll notice other fun folks, for example, like Karl Marx or Vladimir Lenin, Chairman Mao, Joseph Stalin, and some deep cuts like I'll save some of the special ones, but a variety of American presidents. You've got some terrorists in here, just some big giants of humanity from across the spectrum gathered around to see this scene.
Yeah, some people that you would expect, definitely. All of the Bible boys are here. You got Judas. You got unnamed former disciple. You have the Apostle Paul, for sure. All these great friends throughout the Bible and history. But then you got some real weirdos. Sigmund Freud's back there. Isaac Newton. Louis Pasteur is back there for some reason, too. And then you got some other people who don't have names, but are just kind of like archetypal figures in our society. For example, my favorite character in the entire painting is sort of like a doughy sort of man in a suit jacket holding a Bible in the air, and Jon Mcnaughton has titled that man in the background to be a politically correct preacher, and pretty great to include him right back there. That he's politically correct. It's a really important thing.
We know that he's the politically correct preacher because there's a really fantastic gadget on Jon Mcnaughton's website where a few of the paintings are called interactive paintings, and you can scroll your mouse across the faces of these beautifully rendered individuals and get a little bit more knowledge about it. So, for example, politically correct preacher, short description follows. In today's society, often political correctness is preached from the pulpit. The Bible's interpreted to fit the mold of feel-good preachers who claim good is evil and evil is good. There's some more. There's some biblical judgments that follow, but that's the kind of flavor text you're getting on an image like this.
There's so much going on in this picture, and so many sort of historical figures. I mean, obviously some of our favorites. We got Lenin, we got Marx over here. Under the Marx picture, Jon Mcnaughton has written this kind of big explanation of who Karl Marx was. But at the very end of the big explanation, Jon Mcnaughton writes, "You might say communism is the great antagonist of Christianity." And I guess, not exactly wrong, but as we've shown on our podcast, there's some complications with that, Jon Mcnaughton. Lenin also killed like a gazillion Christians, in case you didn't know. Yeah, they're all there, though. All of these guys. It's kind of just a weird thing to put all of these people, these historical figures, around Jesus, and like they're all responding to him in one way or another. Like some people are like crying and very upset that Jesus is about to be crucified, but Karl Marx and some of the other folks are like pointing at him and like jeering. So kind of an interesting tableau he set up here for us.
Yeah, it is. There are loads of communists in here. So we mentioned Stalin and Lenin. Fidel is in here. Kim Jong-il is in here.
Khrushchev, he's back there too.
Khrushchev, Mao. My favorite, though. Okay, here's my favorite in the entire painting. Just scroll. I don't know if you've seen this one, Matt, but put your mouse on Khrushchev. And then scroll just to the left. You're going to see Satan. And then right underneath Satan. Go ahead and check that guy out.
Christian leader?
Yeah, go ahead and read that description of Christian leader.
It's so good. Oh my god, I wasn't expecting this. Okay, Christian leader, right by, to the left of Khrushchev, and then below Satan, Christian leader. This represents a modern Christian leader whose image cannot be shown because of copyright restrictions.
Why do I feel like there's a backstory to this?
I know, right? Oh my gosh.
So that's just what's so great, I think, about this website in general, is there's all kinds of Easter eggs floating around in these paintings, and you can just I mean, if you're anything like us, you can lose a whole couple of hours to uncovering them and giggling about them. I mean, we've been looking at these paintings for like 20 minutes, and I just now discovered Christian leaders, so the gifts keep on giving.
Yeah, I love when I find Easter eggs in video games or in movies or something, but now here's a painting with Easter eggs, and really that's what art has been missing all of these years.
That's true. That's what we've needed. Every time I go to a museum now, it's going to be a big disappointment, because I'm going to say, yeah, but where can I put my cursor?
Excuse me, art attendant, can you point me to where all the Easter eggs are in this painting?
Listen, I know you got your degree at a real life school. I know that you have an actual degree in art history, but if I put my my smartphone over this part of the painting, what am I going to see? What kind of flavor text is going to come up?
Yeah. Oh, it's also probably worth noting too that Jon Mcnaughton himself is in this painting. He's painted himself in here right behind Jesus pulling this big old cross down the street. So that's something to think about too.
He is prominently displayed.
Okay, so there are all these people looking on. Jon Mcnaughton's in there. Jesus is in there. If you hover over Jesus, guess what it tells you? He's the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, obviously. The sort of like modern Christian is there with Jesus, and just hanging out with him, just there, telling everyone to chill out. It's okay. Jesus has got this. What a weird picture. Honestly, I have no idea.
It is a collection
I have no idea what to think.
A lot of things. We need the Dan Brown novel is the thing. We're never going to have the interpretive key until Dan Brown does the research for us.
This is like a really weird, this is like the fourth movie in the Bill and Ted universe where they get all of these figures.
Yeah, there's no Socrates in here.
I don't know where Socrates is at. Joan of Arc's here though. Joan of Arc is here. I think Beethoven's in here somewhere too. So
yeah,
we're all
Beethoven.
here. Except Bill and Ted. I don't see them either, but they're probably just in the back. Can't see them.
Probably, yeah. I mean, that's where they would be, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so that just gives you an idea. We thought we'd sort of start out with just a kind of biblical epic painting. That would be one way we could describe this before we get into some of the political narrative that Jon Mcnaughton tells over the last decade. He's really chronicled the history of the United States in a series of paintings. So what do you think, Matt? Are we ready to move on? I mean, have you obviously nobody's really done with this painting, but are you willing to come back to it later on your own time?
Yeah, I think so. I think I can say that.
All right.
I will come back to this later on my own time.
All right.
I just found Castro. I didn't know he was in. I know you said he was in there, but I didn't see him, and now I see him, and I'm glad that I've seen him.
Yeah, it's not a bad rendition.
It's great.
I saw that it was him, and I was like, oh, Castro's in here.
Yeah.
You did it, Mcnaughton. So The Forgotten Man. This is the first painting in a series of paintings that Mcnaughton did. Just kind of, reflecting on the state of the United States. This is when Barack Obama was still the president. And, man, it is something else. Matt, I went ahead and drew us into the, cinematographically into the last painting. So I'll invite you to do this one.
Yeah. So The Forgotten Man's a really important painting within the Mcnaughton Oeuvre. It was one that somebody actually bought. Okay, people have bought a lot of his paintings, I guess, but Sean Hannity bought this one on TV. It was an episode of Sean Hannity's show where he bought this painting from
So
the
know
painter.
it's real.
So it's real. He bought it, as one source reports, for 6 figures, which is hard for me to want. I don't want that to be true, but it is.
But do you think that's just like a trade of 6 small figurines?
Yeah, it's all of it was all Sean Hannity's D&D minis, and now Jon Mcnaughton.
He's like, I haven't played with my regular party in a while. I think we've fallen apart. Honestly, you can have these.
It's okay. This character died a long time ago. Okay. So the painting itself is absolutely stunning. Again, another big crowd of people is kind of what you see in the back. The big crowd of people is standing before the White House, so that's good. Sort of a really patriotic scene out in Washington. The big crowd of people that I mentioned, they are all former presidents. All the presidents are there, all your faves. You got Abraham Lincoln, you got Reagan, you got George Washington, John F. Kennedy. I can't name them all, but they're all there. Every single one of them. And then right sort of in front of all of the other presidents, there's James Madison and also Barack Obama. Now, what's going on here is kind of complicated, so let me just really walk you through it. Barack Obama is here in the foreground of the painting, standing with one foot upon the Constitution, while James Madison is sort of gesturing towards the Constitution like, hey, that's the Constitution, don't stand on that. Okay, so then off to the side of Barack Obama standing on the Constitution is a character that reoccurs throughout Jon Mcnaughton's paintings called the Forgotten Man. The Forgotten Man's just like a sort of regular-looking white guy with a button-up T-shirt on a bench, and all the other presidents are gesturing towards him like, Barack Obama, you've forgotten this man. But Obama, he don't care. He don't care at all. It's also worth noting, too, that in the interactive version of this painting, it does list every single one of these presidents, and right under their name, or right under like their sort of like place in the presidency, for example, Barack Obama was the 44th president, it also lists the national debt at the time they were president.
Yeah, earlier when I was chuckling as you were describing this, I actually hadn't noticed that the first time, and I did now, just mousing over them. The national debt of every single president of the United States, apparently, is here.
Yeah, pretty wild. So some of them are very low because they were like, the second president, and some of them are 20 trillion because it was Barack Obama. So let me just do a quick reading of the Barack Obama Jon Mcnaughton caption. On the figure of Barack Obama standing on the Constitution, Jon Mcnaughton says, "Obama rode into power on the slogan of change, and change we have. But is it what the American people had in mind? Mr. President, you took an oath." And then in quotes, "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Mr. President, what have you done?" Jon Mcnaughton writes all these captions as if they were like love letters to the person.
My favorite is that he spelled road wrong at the beginning. Obama rode into power. I love it so much because, like, okay, spelling isn't everyone's strong suit, and that's fine. But, like, millions of people have looked at this, for sure. And Sean Hannity bought it, and no one, like, had the sensitivity to just pull him aside and be like, hey, listen, there's a typo on your website.
Yeah. Yeah, so the sort of the signification of all of the symbolism in this picture is pretty clear, I think, to all of us. Obama's a bad guy, and he stands on top of the Constitution and doesn't respect it.
He forgot about that man.
He forgot about that one man, and to be honest, he looks just like every other man I've ever seen, so it's not hard to forget him.
He's pretty forgettable.
Yeah. He doesn't have like a big fancy hat or any kind of like sort of special name tag. He's just a guy that you could definitely forget.
Yeah, he's got like a pearl snap button t-shirt, like flannel on for some reason. Some like nondescript blue jeans, some like shoes that my dad kind of wore. Oh, he's married, I guess. I just saw the wedding ring.
Oh, yeah.
Man, where's his wife though? Talk about the forgotten man.
I know. Like, did he forget her too?
Yeah, forgotten woman.
Oof.
More like it.
So this is a painting that Sean Hannity, again, paid like $1 million for, which is, I don't know. I can't even deal with that.
Or at least $999,999.
Exactly. Right. So from these two paintings, you can quickly see sort of the type of political ideology that's working here on Jon Mcnaughton, America's painter. He's really into Jesus, and he thinks everyone should kind of be into him as well. And also, Barack Obama is not great, but he does love Jon Mcnaughton, not Barack Obama. Jon Mcnaughton does love the Constitution. So there you go. There's one more kind of added feature to this painting that we should probably talk about quickly, is that in the foreground, kind of surrounding the Constitution, are a bunch of political legislation, like they're pieces of paper with names of political legislation on them, and then there's also lots of money on the ground, like just kind of everywhere. So like some of the political
they're all
legislation,
$1 bills.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're cheap. It's like cheap legislation. So some of the bills that are on the ground are the Social Security net, which is not like a bill, but just says Social Security net on it. There's one that says the Patriot Protection. Oh, shoot, I can't read it. The Patriot Protection Care Act. I don't know what that is either. Again, I think that's made up, but it's just like supposed to represent just politics and money. Oh, disgusting.
That's right. All right. We should probably also note the caption on the Forgotten Man himself. This is really important because there's going to be an entire epic narrative related to the journey of this Forgotten Man. So understanding him at what we might call rock bottom or the beginning of this hero's journey is very important. So I'll just pull out a couple of important quotes. So first of all, Mcnaughton writes, he represents every man, woman, and child of every color and creed who is an American. White men, that's just what they do. Like you and me, he hopes for a better life, to find the American dream of happiness and prosperity. But now, because of unconstitutional acts imposed upon the American people by our government, we stand on the precipice of disaster. He asks a variety of questions. One of them, especially pertinent to us, is the following. This is a long question with some commas. He says, do you think that the redistribution of wealth, uncontrolled spending, and free handouts for everyone at the cost of burdensome taxation and destruction of our financial system will lead us to some kind of socialistic utopia? So those are just the kinds
I don't think that it will.
No, I don't think so. I don't think anyone really does except for Jon Mcnaughton, because he's genuinely afraid of it. But anyway, that's the kind of character that we're dealing with. So we'll move on to some of the next paintings in a second here. But before we do that, let's just take a break, take a step back, and talk a little bit about what people really come to this podcast for: Christianity and communism / socialism. I think talking about Jon Mcnaughton is interesting because he's not just a guy who paints, but he's actually tapped into a weird cultural moment, and he's like selling these paintings to actual people who have cultural influence, and he's trading on Christian themes and political themes, and there's all kinds of weird aesthetic sort of elements built into it. And I mean, there's a lot of different kind of socialist theories about how art works or how it should work. But we thought it might be fun to use this as an opportunity to talk about something like Soviet realism, right? So this is sort of art made with a direct connection to the masses, the workers, actual human beings of Russia. And you might sort of wrongly read something like Jon Mcnaughton, I think, as coming down to the masses in a weird, similar propagandist way. But I think there's some important differences there. So Matt, you're a real arts guy more than me. So I'm going to throw that over to you to sort of maybe set more of the discursive parameters that we can actually talk in.
Yeah, I'm an arts guy. I don't know if that's true. I've been to museums before, though. Yeah, so I think Jon Mcnaughton is really interesting for all the reasons you said. He definitely has sort of tapped into a cultural moment. Jon McNaughton's fun for us because we can make fun of him, and it's very easy because his paintings are just over the top and silly, and follow have a kind of out there political message. But it is kind of a bummer because people do take him seriously, and some people actually really like Jon McNaughton. For example, this is just an anecdotal example, but still, I think it holds up. I think a few months ago, I tweeted ironically about a Jon McNaughton painting. The irony wasn't directly obvious unless you kind of know me, but I got so many follow backs and so many faves from MAGA folks. It was uncomfortable. So it's not like there's no audience for this type of thing. There clearly is, right? People, especially in sort of the end of Obama's presidency, and there was this spike in very conservative takes. These types of things became really popular. I read one article about Jon McNaughton too, where he was selling these in. So Jon McNaughton, quick history lesson on who he is. He lives in Utah, and he went to Brigham Young University, and they even sold his paintings in the BYU bookstore, which is pretty crazy. Just because like I can't imagine seeing one of these in a university bookstore, but okay. Hey, it happened. Anyways, they purportedly made a lot of money off the paintings, but ended up removing one of them because it was too political, and he found that very distasteful. But anyways, all I'm trying to say is that there's an audience for these types of things. People really like these paintings. I feel like I have to go through a lot of lengths to try to explain and convince people that people actually like Jon Mcnaughton paintings. Okay. All right, so this is definitely a popular type of art in the sense that people like it. There's an audience for it. Again, just reiterating that point. I think, artistically speaking, it's hard to say like what type of genre this is, right? It's a heavy-handed sort of political message. It's propaganda. I think we could say that is not even a stretch. I don't think anyone would disagree to saying it's propaganda. But it doesn't do the things that art usually does. Art usually does, whatever the artist's intention is, but it's usually a type of expression within certain conventions of style and format with regards to painting. But Jon Mcnaughton's pieces are really weird because they are for a specific type of people, for a specific audience. They communicate a heavy-handed political message. They are not super aesthetically pleasing. They're just kind of just paintings shoved and filled to the very brim with every type of hollow political metaphor you can think of. And usually those metaphors are not very veiled. They're pretty obvious. So I think it's safe to say that what Jon Mcnaughton has made is just a lot of kitsch art. So kitsch art, we might just say, is mass produced art. It's for the masses. It's not to make you think about things, right? It's not an expressionist painting where you're like, what could this possibly be? The message is very clear. The message is so clear, in fact, that Jon Mcnaughton puts them on t-shirts. Okay, so it's kitsch art. Historically, when it comes to kitsch art, people talk about all kinds of other types of artistic movements. The Nazis were really into kitsch, sort of the mass production of images, and advertising is a type of kitsch. If you think about it, there's lots of Christian kitsch out there in the world. You walk into any Christian family bookstore, look on the walls and see all of the weird garbage you can buy. But we can kind of circle back around to that later. Christian kitsch is maybe its own particular thing, but I also don't think that what Jon Mcnaughton does is entirely not Christian kitsch because of all the prominence of Jesus in a lot of his images. We're going to talk through here, when we already have started, The Forgotten Man, The Empowered Man, some of his other sort of more political paintings, but Jon Mcnaughton has an entire sort of portfolio of religious paintings as well that are very kitschy in the sense that they are just overtly sort of an overt message with not much sort of artistic interpretation needed. So kitsch, I think, is what Jon Mcnaughton is. Dean, does it seem right to you?
Yeah, I think so. The fact that this is in part something that Jon Mcnaughton believes so sincerely kind of almost makes me want to put it in some other weird category, but I couldn't think of one. I can't think of somewhere else it would be, except for bad authenticity. Some kind of, there's not a category that exists for it, I guess, other than just sort of glorified amateur painting. So kitsch is probably the best way to put it, because it is designed to be just reproduced over and over again, and like you said, put on t-shirts and mugs, so you can drink your coffee out of out of all these crazy people's heads, I guess. So I think what's wild about Mcnaughton and trying to think through how his art functions is that it's not kitsch in the same way that, if you go to Walmart, you can buy a photograph of, I don't know, like a bridge in Amsterdam or something, and it's the same picture of a bridge in Amsterdam that every person, everyone's aunt has one or something. It's not kitsch in that same way, right? Because that's completely innocent. It has no actual value except as a purely decorative sort of function. But in this case, there's something that I think Mcnaughton assumes is actually artistically valuable, or something you would maybe want to have in your home or something, but is actually really intentionally off-putting, brutally didactic in a way that kitsch often is not. So it's to me, it just strikes me as a really weird thing. You can't talk about it exactly because it just defies so many categories, only because like I can't imagine art criticism actually imagining a Jon Mcnaughton.
So I actually looked a little bit through Google, and I couldn't find like any serious sort of criticism of his pieces, which is unsurprising to me. But I think that you're right. There is like, to say this is kitsch is not to say this is like the same as going to Walmart and buying like a Live Laugh Love plaque for your mom or something.
Right.
There's something else kind of going on here. I think that for Jon Mcnaughton, I think he imagines his art because it says something critical.
Right.
And like that is, I think, for him what it means to do like some kind of serious art. But I think that he's wrong because this is something like even stranger. I mean, like if Jon Mcnaughton painted this and it was done in a completely ironic way, I would probably feel way differently about it. But since he is so authentic about it, it's like awkward and kind of embarrassing a little bit to even think through it like that.
Yeah, it's like, in complete honesty, like this very painting, The Forgotten Man, could be like the DVD cover of like a Tim and Eric DVD or something. You know,
right.
like
And I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna buy that.
Yeah, exactly, because it would be very funny.
Yeah, totally. There is some kind of other weird connection I think we can make here, and we have to do a little bit of thinking through what it actually means. So I'm going to propose an idea, and we'll see if this sticks for anybody. Okay, so it's propagandistic, right? There's sort of like a real political message to it. There's a sense in which it's critiquing the hegemony of the Obama era, or of liberalism, or of socialism somehow, but not really. It's for the masses, and that is clear because you can get it on T-shirts. It's kitsch because it's mass-produced. You can buy it, that kind of thing. It's also like really gross and that kind of thing. So it's definitely supposed to persuade people to sort of believe some certain things. It appeals to people with certain types of sensibilities already, right? So it's propaganda. But Dean, what if Jon Mcnaughton has actually just made many iterations of very conservative socialist realism?
Okay, so I think there's something to that thesis, but I think it has to be augmented in a certain way. We could talk more about that in a minute, because here's what I think it gets at. It gets at something where socialist realism is kind of an attempt to like remake the world in a certain way, through artistic projects, like to create an aesthetic environment where people believe that certain things are possible or true or real. And it's a sort of coming together of like really intentional thinking by people who actually know what they're doing, like specialists, but also like mass appeal and like intentional mass distribution. Where I think it's a bit different, though, is that I mean, not only is it different in terms of ideology, obviously, but like Soviet realism has nothing to do with like the demands of the market, for example. I mean, you could just like be employed, and that's like what you do. Whereas something like Jon Mcnaughton, like if nobody bought this stuff, like he couldn't make this kind of garbage. And secondly, like we would almost have to talk about it as like a fundamentalist realism, or like a hyper conservative reactionary realism. Which, yeah, I mean, maybe there's like some analogs, but it's like a dumbed down version or something of the structure of like socialist realism in that way. What do you think about that?
Okay. Yeah, okay. So maybe saying it's socialist realism is overstating it, but there's something there, and I think that we should take some time to sort this out, and also look at more Jon Mcnaughton paintings. Okay. So socialist realism is a sort of artistic movement that most people associate with the Soviet Union, but especially with the Soviet Union sort of post-1920 and during its Stalinization, for sure. That's when socialist realism is sort of rises as the artistic and aesthetic movement of the Soviet Union. It is so much the aesthetic of the Soviet Union because like Stalin says like, this is it. And then it was. Pre-Stalinization of Russia, there were these like types of artistic guilds that were kind of interesting, that different members of like the like artistic avant-garde in Russia were a part of, but Stalin kind of put an end to that and sort of subsumed them all. so that's an interesting thing that happened. But anyways, Stalin's whole like plan behind socialist realism, I mean others too, it's not like he was the only person, but was exactly like what you just said, Dean, kind of harness the power of the avant-garde in the sense of its like world making types of power. So like I don't know how much our listeners know about Russian art and the Russian avant-garde. I assume a lot, but the Russian avant-garde was they were a group of artists who were not sort of afraid to throw all tradition away because they were kind of supreme modernists. So like throwing all tradition away and sort of making a new world through like sort of rational means was definitely their jam. So Stalin adopted that kind of philosophy, but sort of dispensed with the aesthetics of like suprematism or like other types of like avant-garde movements for like a more mass focused type of art. So then that's like where you get like, you know, all of those images of like workers in factories with their fists raised and so on. It's a type of art and a type of aesthetic that communicates the ideas of socialism, especially Soviet like style socialism, to the masses that are out there. So you could say that like Soviet realism or socialist realism, I guess, is also a type of kitsch, and that's mass produced, but it's different in some important ways. The socialist realism of Stalin is also something that people really love to hate. So if you ever read any sort of art critics from the 20th century, they are not a fan of that aesthetic. And, you know, there are reasons to have that type of criticism. One of the most famous essays, I think, at least, of socialist realism is by a guy named Clement Greenberg. There's an essay called The Avant-Garde and Kitsch, in which he kind of takes socialist realism to task, and the avant-garde in general to task. So Greenberg, talking about socialist realism, says this: since these regimes, these meaning like, he means basically all sort of, quote, totalitarian regimes. So he's lumping in the Soviet Union with Nazis and fascists, which is bad ideologically, but he's an art critic for a reason. So he says, since these regimes cannot raise the cultural level of the masses, even if they wanted to, by anything short of a surrender to international socialism, they will flatter the masses by bringing all culture down to their level. It is for this reason that the avant-garde is outlawed, and not so much because a superior culture is inherently a more critical culture. So this is, I mean, basically exactly what I just said. Stalin outlaws the avant-garde while sort of taking their, like, I guess, energy in a certain way, their, like, ideas, and sort of switches the dominant aesthetic just because he can do that, I suppose. So Greenberg's characterization of Soviet realism is that it brings art down to the masses. It kind of drags culture down, not to be more critical, but just to sort of spread a type of idea about socialism. So Dean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert on Soviet aesthetics, and one thing I love about listening to you say all that is this is what it's like to walk with Matt through a museum, by the way, which is actually very fun and good. You learn a lot in a very short amount of time. That's a good time. So I can't speak with any authority on it, really. However, I did read exactly one book about Soviet realism, and that's Boris Groys's book, The Total Art of Stalinism. I read this book all the way through a long time ago, and then I kind of reread the beginning of it to think a little more about this. And Groys is really fascinating because he was like doing art criticism in the Soviet Union, and then after it fell, he moved to Germany and then to the United States and some other places, and just started writing about like philosophy and art that was happening in the Soviet Union and kind of what it means to think through that today. So, I mean, he makes a lot of intentionally kind of controversial claims, I think. But his read on Stalinism in general is to read it as like a gigantic aesthetic effort to try to sort of recreate the world in a certain way. Just like you were saying, Matt, where Stalin it sort of internalizes this habit or this sensibility from the avant-garde that tradition is something that you can just overlook and you can build something else in its place. But I think what's really fascinating about the way that Groys reads it is it's actually sort of a counterpoint to the Greenberg stuff, and intentionally, like, he interacts with that literature. So he says things like this. Gross writes, socialist realism was not created by the masses, but was formulated in their name by well-educated and experienced elites who had assimilated the experience of the avant-garde and been brought to socialist realism by the internal logic of the avant-garde method itself, which had nothing to do with the actual tastes and demands of the masses. So, like, okay, he kind of agrees with the Greenberg thesis that, the avant-garde is kind of like brought down to the level of the masses. But what I think is a little bit more interesting is that that's not necessarily like a bad thing, and it's not necessarily a good thing either. But for Groys, it's just like a thing that happened. That this is sort of a really wild experiment of bringing extremely like niche and accelerated ideas into like more banal daily life. And there's something kind of like radical and wild about that, actually, despite whatever other kind of problems we might want to like index in terms of the Stalinization of Russia. I don't know, Matt, what do you think about the Groys story of all of that, of socialist realism?
Yeah, I think Groys's take is a little bit better than Greenberg. Way more nuanced. I mean, Groys wrote an entire book. Greenberg wrote an essay. So you got to expect that a little bit. Yeah, I think that just Groys pointing out that socialist realism is not just like sort of this like dumb art, but it has like sort of like an avant-garde method to it. Kind of overturns a little bit what Greenberg says about about like a lack of critical culture or something. I think socialist realism is a type of critical culture, actually, because it is itself a critique, and it's like a world building type thing, right? So it has to have some type of like criticalness in it. So I think that, yeah, Groys gives us a little bit of a bigger way to think about socialist realism than just like, I don't know, it's bad and it's for just everybody or something.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's cool too because like it's really easy to write off Soviet or socialist realism as just propagandizing. You know, like this is just art made for the sake of trying to like bully people into agreeing with you through, forcing it on them at every turn or something. But what's actually more interesting about it that Groys points out is that this is like an artistic experiment that's being done, and there are creative energies that are involved in it. And it's not as simple as just propagandizing, even though it clearly has a propagandist purpose to it. There's a real like set of kind of there's like an emerging tradition in its attempt to break away from past certain traditions. I think that's like a way more interesting way of reading it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so it's for those reasons though that I think that Jon Mcnaughton is kind of doing something similar, but different for important reasons too. Okay, so we talked about sort of a Christian painting that he's done, and we can kind of talk more about his Christianity in a while because it's, different. It's worth pointing out too, just to be like completely transparent about this. Jon Mcnaughton is like a Mormon, but like I think that even his Mormonism is a little bit like out of the ordinary.
Yeah, it's like evangelicalized in a weird way.
It's evangelicalized in a way, but also like, I mean, Mormonism is like, a conservative a conservative religious ideology for sure, but also like, I think that he tends towards a pretty extreme side of that. I don't know. I know some folks who are Mormon and they're just perfectly pleasant and also very progressive. So there.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, cool. But there's a certain type of energy that is kind of like following that avant-garde, like ready to recreate the world kind of energy, in the sense that like, okay, in Forgotten Man, there's this like scene with Obama standing on the Constitution, right? It's a very critical painting. It's critiquing the sort of like liberal socialist whatever thing that Jon Mcnaughton sees in the world. It's drawing out a critique about sort of about contemporary politics, but it's also creating a sort of scene where everyone else in the United States politics, all of the Republicans, all of the founding fathers, they're there and they're also anti-Obama, right? So it's recasting the present in like the light of a imagined past. And like, I don't know, sounds like that avant-garde energy to me, right? That's that world building power that I think Stalin saw as like, strong.
Yeah, for sure. There is something to that, no doubt about that. And I guess, yeah, this is an interesting thing too, because Mcnaughton's art is it's attempting to have a mass appeal. But I think where one major part where a difference is that it can only really have mass appeal because Mcnaughton doesn't appear to have a critical consciousness that takes him outside of a certain kind of like banality. Like there's no sophisticated avant-garde that informs these kind of paintings. In fact, most of the profiles in this very painting are all, like, I'm mousing over them now, you can tell which presidential portraits he has literally just ripped off to paint into here. Like actual photos of like George W. Bush, for example. So in that sense, it's like, I guess that's where it sort of moves back in the kind of kitsch direction. Because he like can't actually imagine a totally different world. He's just kind of creating like very strange collages of impressions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. It's also the case too. This is my official. If I gave the official Artman take, this is the official new media take. that his paintings also don't work unless you're looking at them online, because like, I mean, there are all these figures in them, and chances are you won't know who half of them are. Like, right. I mean, maybe you're a particularly good and patriotic person that knows the American history really well, and you can name all 44 presidents. But, like, even if you can name all 44 presidents, chances are you don't know what James K. Polk looks like, and the only way you know is if you looked online at Jon Mcnaughton's website. The only
you
way
definitely
I know
don't know what his national debt was.
No, you definitely don't. It's 63 million, by the way. James K. Polk sunk us deep. The only reason I know anything about James K. Polk too is because that They Might Be Giants song, which is great,
same.
by the way. So there you go.
Deploying to the stump. All right, so we've got like some stuff on the table. I guess that's a really long like digression out of some of the not Mcnaughton expanded universe. But let's dive back in here. So all right. Maybe we can kind of think a little bit more about how this waffles back and forth between realism and kitsch, or like a kind of fundamentalist realism and kitsch. So we've got The Forgotten Man. That's the first in the series. And then we've got a painting called The Empowered Man. And this also came out during the Obama presidency. And it's worth kind of drawing out this scene a little bit, and we can chat about it some more. So, whereas in The Forgotten Man, the Forgotten Man, or the man, I guess, as he comes to be known, the adjectived man, he's off to the left, sitting on a bench, demoralized. Here, Mcnaughton has zoomed into that very picture, and instead of Obama stepping on the Constitution, now the newly empowered man is holding the Constitution up, and he's the center of the frame. This is like a weird sort of comic book panel, I guess, the next panel in the series. So now on the left-hand side, where all these, sort of seemingly good presidents in Mcnaughton's view were like, horrified by Obama's actions. Now they're like literally sort of praising the empowered man, laughing and clapping. Whereas on the right hand side, all the spooky bad presidents, they look decidedly more defeated. And Barack Obama has his hands out like, oh no, what's coming after me now? He's like really scared of this newly empowered American man, who's also holding a wad of cash now, which is pretty amazing.
All those $1 bills that were on the ground, he's got them because small government's in charge now. Yeah, small government gave $20 to this man, and he is empowered. His tax returns just got huge. Yeah, yeah. My favorite part of the empowered man is James Madison, who was very upset in the last painting, is now on his knees praying to God. So love that.
It was very good. Also, George W. Bush, who was looking kind of ambiguous in the Forgotten Man painting and pointing toward the other side. Curiously, Mcnaughton actually puts him on like the suspicious side with the other presidents. Apparently, because of his his I don't know what, like some crazy libertarian criticisms of Bush going on here. But now in the new one, he looks like a little bit more cheerful.
Yeah. All right. So the empowered man is just the inverse of the forgotten man, sort of like it's Jon Mcnaughton trying to figure out how he can sort of, how do the American people get through that Obama period? just one more quick digression. There is another painting that Jon Mcnaughton has made called Abomination, and you gotta look at it. It's we couldn't describe it on this podcast. It's actually beyond words. So you just have to look it up because it's too much. And once you see it, you'll be like, they were right, because you can't describe what it is. It's
I mean, none
much.
of these work in the audio medium, but that one especially does not work.
Yeah, well, I mean, like all of the rest of them are like people standing in front of White House, but Abomination is just too much. It's too much to say. Okay, so there's the Forgotten Man. That's man sitting on bench, looking very sad. There's Empowered Man. That one's man standing in front of bench, clutching Constitution. We get to the next one, which I think has a lot more to do with maybe it's more in the lane of this podcast, in that it has a lot of religious symbolism in it, but also political. So the third sort of panel in this hellscape of a comic book is called "You Are Not Forgotten," and this is a painting that Jon Mcnaughton does that signals the beginning of Trump's presidency and sort of like the rehabilitation of that man who had been forgotten. So in this painting, there's a lot going on. Okay. So, again, it takes place in front of the White House. That same bench that guy's been sitting in the entire time is still there. All of the old presidents, though, they're gone, which is, I think, pretty important.
It is.
In their place is just
this
like
is the avant-garde moment.
This is it's so avant-garde. It's like avant-garde as hell. So all the old presidents are gone, and they've all been replaced by like veterans and people holding flags, and some military people, and some police officers. Am I missing anybody? Is there anyone else that's in the background that's really important? I can't tell.
That looks about it to me.
Who's that? Who's the guy right behind Trump? He's actually somebody.
Well, there's Mike
Pence. Like that one. Yeah, Mike Pence is there, but there's like that one sheriff that Trump did something with.
Yeah.
Shoot. I don't remember his name. It must not be important then if I can't. Okay, so all the presidents have been replaced, and now all these other people are there, just like regular sort of Americans. Trump is standing in the foreground where Obama used to be, and then the Forgotten Man has shown up and is now planting a small tree in the dirt. But he's not forgotten anymore. He's with his family. There's a woman to his left and a very a young girl to his right, who I suppose are his family. He still has that same shirt on, which must be just stanky by this point. But Trump's there gesturing.
A couple years that he's been living on this bench.
Yeah, that's right. Trump's there just kind of gesturing at him like, "You're doing it. I have not forgotten you, Forgotten Man." And then this is where the whole picture kind of comes together for me. So Trump is there in the foreground where Obama was, because now Trump's the president. All the old presidents are gone. He's like this new guy that's like here to like, kick ass and take names or whatever. But what is really significant about this painting is that Trump is standing on the head of a snake, which is some real biblical imagery right there. I mean, it's some libertarian imagery too, in a kind of a bad way, but it's biblical in the sense of like, Mary treading on a snake. Dean, what can we make of this wild thing here? What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, it is a crazy scene, no doubt about that. Just very surreal. There's a lot happening. But in his own description, he says at the end, "I want a president that will crush the enemies of liberty, justice, and American prosperity. They may have the power to bruise his heel, but he will have the power to crush their head." A lot going on here. Not least that Trump is some kind of strange analog for the Virgin Mary, I guess. There is so much happening, but it's that weird messianic kind of trope that you see in this painting that is probably the most troubling and the most like genuinely kind of fascist thing about it. The idea of sort of seeing Trump as, the crusher of all enemies of American prosperity, and then identifying all of that with like Satan as symbolized in the serpent, and Trump crushing him is just a whole nother level, I think, of like really troubling religious symbolism that has actually sort of aggregated around Trump through no fault of his own, like just purely imposed on him by people who kind of want a theologically imaginative aura around him.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, okay, so if this painting was just like as it is, but without the snake, sans snake, like it would make complete sense to me. It's like, okay, so now Trump's here, and it's just like that's awesome. But like adding him like sort of crushing the snake is, I think, a step towards like Christofascism that I was not exactly expecting in this painting. Like, listen,
Yeah.
I teach at an evangelical college, and like, I don't know, I get that people like Trump and they think that he's a big deal. But it's not the case that everyone thinks that Trump is like messianic in this way. Even though that's how sometimes people talk about him. But anyways, I think it's a good depiction about those types of like, the ways that the messianism of Christianity and like the sort of fascism of the U.S. government, especially Donald Trump, kind of mix together and intermingle within the imaginaries of people. So there's a lot happening here.
There really is. So lots more that could be mined, but let's go ahead and just conclude this comic strip and go to the last painting in the series, which is called Teach a Man to Fish. So this is a pretty recent one. Really big deal. The painting is it like made a bunch of rounds on the internet, but it depicts a man who looks quite a lot like the Forgotten Man. Whether or not he is exactly the same is not completely clear to me.
You can't tell because he's got a hoodie on. That's the difference.
Yeah, that's right.
He has a gray hoodie, and that's like
he finally
like
changed his clothes.
The Forgotten Man like went to college.
Well, he does actually say that he's a young college student in the description. So, you know, maybe he hasn't. Maybe this is like a weird like back in time sort of moment. But what I love about it is, so it's a bench. That's a theme in Jon Mcnaughton paintings, I guess. I've just noticed, but it's a bench, publicly funded, I'm sure. And Trump is on the right hand side. The young college ward is on the left hand side, and he's looking through a tackle box while Donald Trump is showing him a baited hook. Some real levels of irony that I don't think Mcnaughton fully understands. And to the left, even further, he has this backpack, old dirty Jansport down there. And next to that backpack is a stack of books. One on the spine just says socialism. The one underneath it says justice warrior. So, you know, those are the kind of things that are just being taught in universities these days. These college kids, who knows what they're learning? But Trump isn't going to teach them that kind of garbage. He's going to teach them how to fish for himself so that he doesn't have to wait for the government to fish for him, I guess. So it's a pretty serene scene. I mean, if you deleted all the, like, human figures out of it, it would just be like a really boring postcard of, I don't know, sitting in like a meadow or something. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kind of ideological weight behind it. But I think one thing worth calling attention to is just in the product description here. He says, Trump has suggested through his educational policy that people can be taught a skilled vocation. How will Trump make America great again? I believe this mantra is about giving American citizens an equal opportunity to find success. Equal opportunity is different than equal results. You can give a man a pole. You can give a man a pole. It doesn't mean he will use it. So that's kind of the ideology informing this serene scene. Matt, anything kind of stick out to you about the conclusion of this series?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Donald Trump he was the guy that confused vocational schools and community colleges, so maybe not the greatest guy to take educational sort of takes from, but okay. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good encapsulation of it. It's also pretty weird. I mean, this is kind of apart from the ideological weight of it for sure, but I've looked at a lot of Jon Mcnaughton paintings in preparation for this moment right now, and Jon Mcnaughton is good at painting two things. He's good at painting benches, and he's good at painting Donald Trump. With this painting is the exception to both. Because first of all, the perspective on this bench is really weird to me, and I don't know
wrong.
Why that is. But the Donald Trump in this painting is so different looking than all of the rest. His face is definitely an Alec Baldwin Donald Trump and not like a regular Donald Trump. And
it really is.
Like, so if you compare Jon Mcnaughton's Teach a Man to Fish to Jon Mcnaughton's Respect the Flag, it's an utterly different Donald Trump, which is, I don't really know what to make of that. other than like it's just really strange. Jon Mcnaughton did something weird. So again, I referenced another one. So Respect the Flag is basically it's a painting of Donald Trump in the middle of a sports stadium, and he's like on the football field clutching an American flag that's all torn up, and it's about respecting America, respecting the flag, all those great things. But it's such a realistic Donald Trump in the sense that he looks like old and weathered, like I don't know, like he actually does,
flag.
like the flag that he's holding. I mean, Donald Trump is like an old man, like that's what he looks like, and that's what he looks like in the Respect the Flag painting. But in Teach a Man to Fish, he's like young, and it looks like Alec Baldwin. So I don't know why that is. It just must be something like something psychoanalytic going on here, I'm sure. Like I need to talk to a Lacanian about this, perhaps. Donald Trump is holding it to me very phallic, so what else can you say? I don't know. But like just a weird thing. Donald Trump is going to teach all these kids how to fish, get them out there. So again, though, it's creating the mythos of like of what a Trump presidency looks like, and that mythos is like teaching the young kids that socialism and social justice warrioring is not a good profession.
That's right. I will say more about that point in a second, but I just wanted to point out in the bottom right-hand corner of this painting, he has a signature there, and apparently his signature is just his last name in painted chiller font. So I don't know. It looks like, or like in like Slipknot font.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Anyway, yeah. No, I think that you're right though that what Mcnaughton is trying to do is create an artistic universe that he lives in. I mean, I think you can read a lot of these paintings as basically projecting his own fantasies into like his own art and the Trump presidency in general. When you read the descriptions, like he's constantly got this kind of weird self-appointed prophetic tone where, you know, he's telling everybody what's what, and his art is the thing that everyone is definitely listening to. You know, he's the Elijah like crying out in the desert or something, just waiting for people to listen. And I think that gives a kind of weird like religious tone to it, but when you get right down to it, it is similar to other kinds of aestheticizations of politics where it's like he's trying to paint the world that he actually wants to live in, and also trying to sell that world on coffee mugs and t-shirts.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to pull out one more painting from the Jon Mcnaughton portfolio again, just to kind of prove your point. And because I love looking at these beautiful works of art here. So one of my faves, I mean, they're all my favorite, honestly. Picking one favorite Jon Mcnaughton painting is like trying to name your favorite child. You can't do it. But one of my faves definitely is called Expose the Truth. It's great on so many levels. Okay, so Expose the Truth is a painting featuring both Robert Mueller and Donald Trump, and it's kind of taking place here. So Robert Mueller is investigating Trump, but in this painting, Trump's investigating Robert Mueller. So the painting is great. It's against the backdrop of just like a bunch of people, I guess other politicians. And Trump is like holding Robert Mueller by the tie, like very aggressively, and holding up a magnifying glass to Robert Mueller's face, and looking at Robert Mueller through the magnifying glass, as if to say, like, Robert Mueller, who are you to investigate Trump? Trump is going to investigate you.
That's right.
But it's like, you know, it's like Jon Mcnaughton knows what's happening in the world, or he's heard like news lines on TV or whatever, like headlines. And, like, he's going to paint the opposite. Like, you can't investigate the president because, like, he's the best. So he's going to investigate Robert Mueller. It's like, I don't know, definitely just, like, dreaming up some kind of weird alternate scenario of, like, what Jon Mcnaughton thinks should happen about the world or something.
Totally. I love, personally, I mean, the paintings are amazing, but the descriptions are especially wild. I mean, there's one called One Nation Under Socialism, which is literally just a picture of Obama burning the Constitution, which is amazing. But he says all kinds of wild things about socialism. But my favorite two lines in it are, again, at the end, he says, "At this very moment, our Constitution is literally going up in flames. Amazing, because it literally is not. And, the very final line says why socialism failed, and then it links to a link that's outside the website, and if you click on it, the website does not exist anymore. And you can like pay to register the domain, which I guess we probably should do.
Oh my god, we should do that.
Okay, well, now you know how we spend the Patreon money. Pulling the curtain back. So anyway, I think, like, all sort of joking aside, like, there is something kind of valuable about just coming through this garbage if you have nothing left to do, which is to sort of get your head around, like, how some people genuinely believe the United States is going, or like has gone, and what they think about socialism. And I guess, like, I don't know, we need some good Christian socialist realists to tell Jon Mcnaughton off.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard in this episode, and I can't imagine that you didn't, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/the Magnificast. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called the Magnificast Basement, where just this week I was able to give someone a PDF of a book they wanted. So that's the kind of service and community you can expect to join there. One
Really
where
valuable
PDFs
stuff.
are distributed. Yeah, exactly. Intro music is by Amari Armstrong, and outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. Cool. Well, we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.